Hello, and welcome to the latest reading from If Only They Could Talk by James Herriot. This is chapters 21 and 22. So, I dropped the suture needles into the tray and stepped back to survey the finished job. Well, though I say it myself, that looks rather nice. Tristan leaned over the unconscious dog and examined the neat incision with its row of regular stitches. Very pretty indeed, my boy. Couldn't have done better by myself. The big black Labrador lay peacefully on the table, his tongue lolling, his eyes glazed and unseeing. He had been brought in with an ugly growth over his ribs, and I had decided that it was a simple lymphoma, quite benign and very suitable for surgery. And so it had turned out. The tumour had come away with almost ridiculous ease, round, intact and shining, like a hard-boiled egg from its shell. No hemorrhage, no fear of recurrence. The unsightly swelling had been replaced by this tidy scar which would be invisible in a few weeks. I was pleased. We'd better keep him here till he comes round, I said. Give me a hand to get him onto these blankets. We made the dog comfortable in front of an electric stove, and I left to start my morning round. It was during lunch that we first heard the strange sound. It was something between a moan and a howl, starting quite softly, but rising to a piercing pitch before shuddering back from the scale to silence. Siegfried looked up, startled from his soup. What in God's name is that? Must be that dog I operated on this morning, I replied. The odd one does that coming out of barbiturates. I expect he'll stop soon. Siegfried looked at me doubtfully. Well, I hope so. I could soon get tired of that. Gives me the creeps. We went through and looked at the dog. Pulse strong, respirations deep and regular, mucous membranes a good colour. He was still stretched out, immobile, and the only sign of returning consciousness was the howl, which seemed to have settled down into a groove of 1 every 10 seconds. Yes, he's perfectly all right, Siegfried said. But what a bloody noise! Let's get out of here. Lunch was finished hastily and in silence except for the ceaseless background wailing. Siegfried had scarcely swallowed his last mouthful before he was on his feet. Well, I must fly. Got a lot on this afternoon. Tristan, I think it would be a good idea to bring that dog through to the sitting room and put him by the fire. Then you could stay by him and keep an eye on him. Tristan was stunned. You mean I have to stay in the same room as that noise all afternoon? Yes, I mean just that. We can't send him home as he is, and I don't want anything to happen to him. He needs care and attention. Maybe you'd like to hold his paw, or perhaps wheel him round the marketplace. Don't give me any of your bloody cheek. You stay with the dog, and that's an order. Tristan and I stretchered the heavy animal along the passage on the blankets. Then I had to leave for the afternoon round. I paused and looked back at the big black form by the fire, and Tristan crouched miserably in his chair. The noise was overpowering. I closed the door hurriedly. It was dark when I got back, and the old house hung over me, black and silent against the frosty sky. Silent, that is, except for the howling, which still echoed along the passage and filtered eerily into the deserted street. I glanced at my watch as I slammed the car door. It was 6 o'clock, so Tristan had had 4 hours of it. I ran up the steps and along the passage, and when I opened the sitting-room door, the noise jarred in my head. Tristan was standing with his back to me, looking through the French window into the darkness of the garden. His hands were deep in his pockets. Tufts of cotton wool drooped from his ears. "Well, how is it going?" I asked. There was no reply, so I walked over and tapped him on the shoulder. The effect was spectacular. Tristan leaped into the air and corkscrewed round. His face was ashen and he was trembling violently. "God help us, Jim. You nearly killed me there. I can't hear a damn thing through these earplugs, except the dog, of course. Nothing keeps that out." I knelt by the Labrador and examined him. The dog's condition was excellent, but, except for a faint eye reflex, there was no sign that he was regaining consciousness. And all the time there were the piercing, evenly spaced howls. "He's taken a hell of a time to come out of it," I said. "Has he been like this all afternoon?" "Yes, just like that. Not one bit different. And don't waste any sympathy on him, the yowling devil. He's as happy as a sandboy down by the fire. Doesn't know a thing about it. But how about me? My nerves are about shot to bits listening to him hour after hour. Much more of it, and you'll have to give me a shot too." He ran a shaking hand through his hair and a twitching started in his cheek. I took his arm. "Well, come through and eat. You'll feel better after some food." I led him unresisting into the dining room. Siegfried was in excellent form over the meal. He seemed to be in a mood of exhilaration and monopolised the conversation, but he did not once refer to the shrill obbligato from the other room. There was no doubt, however, that it was still getting through to Tristan. As they were leaving the room, Siegfried put his hand on my shoulder. "Remember, we've got that meeting in Broughton tonight, James. Old Reeves on diseases of sheep. He's usually very good. Pity you can't come too, Tristan, but I'm afraid you'll have to stay with the dog till he comes round." Tristan flinched as if he had been struck. "Oh, not another session with that bloody animal. He's driving me mad. I'm afraid there's nothing else for it. James or I could have taken over tonight, but we have to show up at this meeting. It would look bad if we missed it." Tristan stumbled back into the room and I put on my coat. As I went out into the street, I paused for a moment and listened. The dog was still howling. The meeting was a success. It was held in one of Broughton's lush hotels, and, as usual, the best part was the get-together of the vets in the bar afterwards. It was infinitely soothing to hear the other men's problems and mistakes, especially the mistakes. It amused me to look round the crowded room and try to guess what the little knots of men were talking about. That man over there bent double, and slashing away at the air with one hand. He was castrating a colt in the standing position. And the one with his arm out at full stretch, his fingers working busily at nothing, almost certainly foaling a mare, probably correcting a carpal flexion, and doing it effortlessly too. Veterinary surgery was a childishly simple matter in a warm bar with a few drinks inside you. It was 11 o'clock before we all got into our cars and headed for our own particular niche in Yorkshire. Some to the big industrial towns of the West Riding, others to the seaside places of the East Coast, and Siegfried and I hurrying thankfully back on the narrow road which twisted between its stone walls into the northern Pennines. I thought guiltily that for the last few hours I had completely forgotten about Tristan and his vigil. Still, it must have been better tonight. The dog would surely have quietened down by now. But jumping from the car in Darrowby, I froze in mid-stride as a thin wail came out faintly from Skeldale House. This was incredible. It was after midnight and the dog was still at it. And what of Tristan? I hated to think what kind of shape he'd be in. Almost fearfully, I turned the knob on the sitting-room door. Tristan's chair made a little island in a sea of empty beer bottles. An upturned crate lay against the wall, and Tristan was sitting very upright and looking solemn. I picked my way over the debris. "Well, has it been rough, Tris? How do you feel now?" "Oh, could be worse, old lad, could be worse. Soon as you'd gone, I slipped over to the drovers for a crate of pint magnets. Made all the difference. After 3 or 4, the doc stopped worrying me. Matter of fact, I've been yowling back at him for hours now. We've had quite an interesting evening. Anyway, he's coming out now. Look at him." The big dog had his head up and there was recognition in his eyes. The howling had stopped. I went over and patted him and the long black tail jerked in a fair attempt at a wag. "That's better, old boy," I said. "But you'd better behave yourself now. You've given your Uncle Tristan one hell of a day." The Labrador responded immediately by struggling to his feet. He took a few swaying steps and collapsed among the bottles. Siegfried appeared in the doorway and looked distastefully at Tristan, still very upright and wearing a judicial expression, and at the dog scrabbling among the bottles. "What an infernal mess! Surely you can do a little job without making an orgy out of it." At the sound of his voice, the Labrador staggered up and, in a flush of overconfidence, tried to run towards him, wagging his tail unsteadily. He didn't get very far and went down in a heap, sending a magnet empty rolling gently over up to Siegfried's feet. Siegfried bent over and stroked the shining black head. "Nice friendly animal, that. I should think he's a grand dog when he's got his senses about him. He'll be normal in the morning, but the problem is what to do with him now. We can't leave him staggering about down here. He could break a leg." He glanced at Tristan, who had not moved a muscle. He was sitting up straighter than ever, stiff and motionless like a Prussian general. "You know, I think the best thing would be for you to take him up to your room tonight. Now we've got him so far, we don't want him to hurt himself. Yes, that's it. He can spend the night with you." Thank you very much indeed," Tristan said in a flat voice, still looking straight to his front. Siegfried looked at him narrowly for a moment, then turned away. "Right then, clear away this rubbish and let's get to bed." My bedroom and Tristan's were connected by a door. Mine was the main room, huge, square, with a high ceiling, pillared fireplace, and graceful alcoves like the ones downstairs. I always felt a little like a duke lying there. Tristan's had been the old dressing room, and was long and narrow, with his small bed crouching at one end as if trying to hide. There were no carpets on the smooth varnished boards, so I laid the dog on a heap of blankets and talked down soothingly at Tristan's wan face on the pillow. "He's quiet now, sleeping like a baby, and looks as though he's going to stay that way. You'll be able to have a well-earned rest now." I went back to my own room, undressed quickly and got into bed. I went to sleep immediately, and I couldn't tell just when the noises started next door, but I came suddenly wide awake with an angry yell ringing in my ears. Then there was a slivering and a bump, followed by another distracted cry from Tristan. I quailed at the idea of going into the dressing room. There was nothing I could do anyway, so I huddled closer into the sheets and listened. I kept sliding into a half-sleep, then starting into wakefulness, as more bumping and shouting came through the wall. After about 2 hours, the noises began to change. The Labrador seemed to have gained mastery over his legs, and was marching up and down the room, his claws making a regular tick-a-tick, tick-a-tick, tick-a-tick on the wooden floor. It went on, interminably. At intervals, Tristan's voice, hoarse now, burst out, "Stop it, for Christ's sake! Sit down, you bloody dog!" I must have fallen into a deeper sleep, because when I awoke the room was grey with the cold light of morning. I rolled onto my back and listened. I could still hear the tick-a-tick of the claws, but it had become irregular, as though the Labrador was strolling about instead of blundering blindly from one end of the room to the other. There was no sound from Tristan. I got out of bed, shivering as the icy air of the room gripped me, and pulled on my shirt and trousers. Tiptoeing across the floor, I opened the connecting door and was almost floored as 2 large feet were planted on my chest. The Labrador was delighted to see me and appeared to be thoroughly at home. His fine brown eyes shone with intelligence and well-being, and he showed rows of glittering teeth and a flawlessly pink tongue in a wide, panting grin. Far below, the tail lashed ecstatically. "Well, you're all right, chum," I said. "Let's have a look at that wound." I removed the horny paws from my chest and explored the line of stitches over the ribs. No swelling, no pain, no reaction at all. "Lovely," I cried. "Beautiful. You're as good as new again." I gave the dog a playful slap on the rump which sent him into a transport of joy. He leaped all over me, clawing and licking. I was fighting him off when I heard a dismal groan from the bed. In the dim light, Tristan looked ghastly. He was lying on his back, both hands clutching the quilt, and there was a wild look in his eyes. "Not a week of sleep, Jim," he whispered. "Not a bloody wink." "He's got a wonderful sense of humour, my brother, making me spend the night with this animal. It'll really make his day when he hears what I've been through. Just watch him. I'll bet you anything you like he'll look pleased." Later, over breakfast, Siegfried heard the details of his brother's harrowing night and was very sympathetic. He condoled with him at length and apologised for all the trouble the dog had given him. But Tristan was right. He did look pleased. Chapter 22. As I came into the operating room, I saw that Siegfried had a patient on the table. He was thoughtfully stroking the head of an elderly and rather woebegone border terrier. "James," he said, "I want you to take this little dog through to Greer." "Greer?" "Vet at Broughton. He was treating the case before the owner moved into our district. I've seen it a couple of times. Stones in the bladder. It needs an immediate operation, and I think I'd better let Greer do it. He's a touchy devil, and I don't want to stand on his toes." "Oh, I think I've heard of him," I said. "Probably you have. A cantankerous Aberdonian. Since he practises in a fashionable town, he gets quite a few students, and he gives them hell. That sort of thing gets around." He lifted the terrier from the table and handed him to me. "The sooner you get through there, the better. You can see the op and bring the dog back here afterwards. But watch yourself. Don't rub Greer the wrong way, or he'll take it out of you somehow." At my first sight of Angus Greer, I thought immediately of whisky. He was about 50, and something had to be responsible for the fleshy mottled cheeks, the swimmy eyes, and the pattern of purple veins which chased each other over his prominent nose. He wore a permanently insulted expression. He didn't waste any charm on me, a nod and a grunt, and he grabbed the dog from my arms. Then he stabbed a finger at a slight, fairish youth in a white coat. "That's Clinton. Final year student. Do you think there's some pansy-looking buggers coming into this profession?" That's supposed to be an Aberdonian accent. During the operation, he niggled constantly at the young man, and in an attempt to create a diversion, I asked when he was going back to college. "Beginning of next week," he replied. "Aye, but he's all home tomorrow," Greer rasped, "wasting his time when he could be getting good experience here." The student blushed. "Well, I've been seeing practice for over a month, and I felt I ought to spend a couple of days with my mother before the term starts." "Oh, I can. You're all the same. Can I stay away from the tetty?" The operation was uneventful, and as Greer inserted the last stitch, he looked up at me. "You'll no want to take the dog back till he's out of the anaesthetic. I've got a case to visit. You can come with me to pass the time." We didn't have what you could call a conversation in the car. It was a monologue, a long recital of wrongs suffered at the hands of wicked clients and predatory colleagues. The story I liked best was about a retired admiral who had asked Greer to examine his horse for soundness. Greer said the animal had a bad heart and was not fit to ride, whereupon the admiral flew into a fury and got another vet to examine the horse. The second vet said there was nothing the matter with the heart and passed the animal sound. The admiral wrote Greer a letter and told him what he thought of him in fairly right quarterdeck language. Having got this out of his system, he felt refreshed and went out for a ride, during which, in the middle of a full gallop, the horse fell down dead and rolled on the admiral, who sustained a compound fracture of the leg and a crushed pelvis. "Man," said Greer with deep sincerity, "man, I was awful glad." We drew up in a particularly dirty farmyard, and Greer turned to me. "I've got a cow to cleanse here." "Right," I said. "Fine." I settled down in my seat and took out my pipe. Greer paused halfway out of the car. "Are you no coming to give me a hand?" I couldn't understand him. Cleansing of cows is simply the removal of retained afterbirth and is a one-man job. "Well, there isn't much I can do, is there?" I said. "And my Wellingtons and coat are back in my car. I didn't realise it was a farm visit. I'd probably get messed up for nothing." I knew immediately that I'd said the wrong thing. The toad-skin jowls flushed darker, and he gave me a malevolent glance before turning away. But halfway across the yard he stopped and stood for a few moments in thought before coming back to the car. "I've just remembered. I've got something here you can put on. You might as well come in with me. You'll be able to pass me a pessary when I want one." It sounded nutty to me, but I got out of the car and went round to the back. Greer was fishing out a large wooden box from his boot. "Here, you can put this on. It's a carving outfit I got a bit ago. I haven't used it much, because I found it a mite heavy, but it'll keep you grand and clean." I looked in the box and saw a suit of thick black shining rubber. I lifted out the jacket. It bristled with zip fasteners and press studs, and felt as heavy as lead. The trousers were even more weighty, with many clips and fasteners. The whole thing was a most imposing creation, obviously designed by somebody who had never seen a cow carved, and having the disadvantage that anybody wearing it would be pretty well immobilized. I studied Greer's face for a moment, but the watery eyes told me nothing. I began to take off my jacket. It was crazy, but I didn't want to offend the man. And, in truth, Greer seemed anxious to get me into the suit, because he was holding it up in a helpful manner. It was a two-man operation. First the gleaming trousers were pulled on and zipped up fore and aft. Then it was the turn of the jacket, a wonderful piece of work, fitting tightly around the waist and possessing short sleeves about 6 inches long with powerful elastic gripping my biceps. Before I could get it on, I had to roll my shirt sleeves to the shoulder. Then Greer, heaving and straining, worked me into it. I could hear the zips squeaking into place, the final one being at the back of my neck to close a high, stiff collar which held my head in an attitude of supplication, my chin pointing at the sky. Greer's heart really seemed to be in his work, and for the final touch he produced a black rubber skull cap. I shrank away from the thing and began to mouth such objections as the collar would allow, but Greer insisted. "Stand still a wee minute longer. We might as well do the job right." When he had finished, he stood back admiringly. I must have been a grotesque sight, sheathed from head to foot in gleaming black, my arms bare to the shoulders, sticking out almost at right angles. Greer appeared well satisfied. "Well, come on. It's time we got on with the job." He turned and hurried towards the byre. I plodded ponderously after him like an automaton. Our arrival in the byre caused a sensation. There were present the farmer, 2 cowmen, and a little girl. The men's cheerful greeting froze on their lips as the menacing figure paced slowly. deliberately in. The little girl burst into tears and ran outside. Cleansing is a dirty, smelly job for the operator, and a bore for the onlooker who may have to stand around for 20 minutes without being able to see anything. But this was one time the spectators were not bored. Greer was working away inside the cow and mumbling about the weather, but the men weren't listening. They never took their eyes away from me as I stood rigid, like a suit of armour against the wall. They studied each part of the outfit in turn, wonderingly. I knew what they were thinking. Sorry about that. Just what was going to happen when this formidable unknown finally went into action. Anybody dressed like that must have some tremendous task ahead of him. The intense pressure of the collar against my larynx kept me entirely out of any conversation, and this must have added to my air of mystery. I began to sweat inside the suit. The little girl had plucked up courage and brought her brothers and sisters to look at me. I could see the row of little heads peeping round the door, and, screwing my head round painfully, I tried to give them a reassuring smile, but the heads disappeared and I heard their feet clattering across the yard. I couldn't say how long I stood there, but Greer at last finished his job and called out, "All right, I'm ready for you now." The atmosphere became suddenly electric. The men straightened up and stared at me with slightly open mouths. This was the moment they had been waiting for. I pushed myself away from the wall and did a right turn with some difficulty before heading for the tin of pessaries. It was only a few yards away, but it seemed a long way as I approached it like a robot, head in the air, arms extended stiffly on either side. When I arrived at the tin, I met a fresh difficulty. I could not bend. After a few contortions, I got my hand into the tin, then had to take the paper off the pessary with one hand. A new purgatory. The men watched in fascinated silence. Having removed the paper, I did a careful about turn and paced back along the byre with measured tread. When I came level with the cow, I extended my arm stiffly to Greer, who took the pessary and inserted it in the uterus. I then took up my old position against the wall while my colleague cleaned himself down. I glanced down my nose at the men. Their expressions had changed to open disbelief. Surely the mystery man's assignment was tougher than that. He couldn't be wearing that outfit just to hand over a pessary. But when Greer started the complicated business of snapping open the studs and sliding the zips, they realised the show was over, and fast on the feeling of letdown came amusement. As I tried to rub some life back into my swollen arms, which had been strangulated by the elastic sleeves, I was surrounded by grinning faces. They could hardly wait, I imagined, to get round to the local that night to tell the tale. Pulling together the shreds of any dignity, I put on my jacket and got into the car. Greer stayed to say a few words to the men, but he wasn't holding their attention. It was all on me, huddling in the seat. They couldn't believe I was true. Back at the surgery, the border terrier was coming out of the anaesthetic. He raised his head and tried bravely to wag his tail when he saw me. I wrapped him in a blanket, gathered him up, and was preparing to leave when I saw Greer through the partly open door of a small storeroom. He had the wooden box on a table, and he was lifting out the rubber suit, but there was something peculiar about the way he was doing it. The man seemed to be afflicted by a kind of rigor. His body shook and jerked. The mottled face was strangely contorted, and a half-stifled wailing issued from his lips. I stared in amazement. I would have said it was impossible, yet it was happening right in front of me. There was not a shadow of a doubt about it. Angus Greer was laughing.